He was known as the Gipper, a Midwesterner who worked as a radio sports commentator. He went to Hollywood and became a movie actor. He was president of the Screen Actors Guild, then moved into television as the host of General Electric Theater. He became a motivational speaker at GE factories. With his televised address in support of Barry Goldwater's presidential candidacy, he became a leader in the conservative movement. He served 2 terms as governor of California, challenged President Ford in the Republican primaries, and finally won the presidential nomination 4 years later. In his 2 terms as president, he worked to cut taxes and reduce government spending. He referred to the Soviet Union as an evil empire, but also negotiated with Soviet leaders on arms reduction. He won a landslide re-election bid and has remained an icon of American conservatism. He retired to California and wrote his memoirs. He later announced his diagnosis with Alzheimer's disease. He died 10 years later and was laid to rest at his presidential library. He is our nation's 40th chief executive, Ronald Reagan. Now let's take a look at a map of the state of Illinois and some sites relating to Ronald Reagan. Reagan was born in Tampico, Illinois, which is in this general area. And he was born in a building that was a tavern, and there was an apartment above the tavern, and that's where his parents lived, and that's where he was born in 1911. As a young child, they moved around a few different times, but they finally settled in Dixon, Illinois, right about here. And you can visit there today, the Ronald Reagan Boyhood Home. Now, Reagan started working as a sportscaster for the radio in a station in Davenport, Iowa, and after doing that for a while, he moved to their sister station, WHO, in Des Moines. And from there, he went off to Hollywood. And with that, let's take a look at another map. This is a map of Southern California. You're looking at the area around Los Angeles. Now, Reagan lived in a number of different places throughout his life once he moved to California. He and Nancy lived in Pacific Palisades in this general area for a while. They lived there at the time of his election to the presidency in 1980. In later years, in their retirement, they lived in Bel Air. They had a home there, which today is a private residence and is not open to the public. The Reagan Ranch is near Santa Barbara in this general area in Goleta, California, in Santa Barbara County. Nancy Reagan sold the ranch to the Young America's Foundation, and they actually keep the ranch up. It's not open to the public. However, they do have a visitor center there where they have displays about the ranch that you can view. Now, the Reagan Presidential Library and Museum is in Simi Valley, California, and that's where President Reagan is buried as well. The library includes the Air Force One Pavilion, which is really something to see. Now let's take a look at some photographs of these locations. Now let's take a look at some books in my collection relating to Ronald Reagan. I have a couple of biographies of Reagan. We'll begin with Dutch, a memoir of Ronald Reagan by Edmund Morris. This was published in 1999. This is the same Edmund Morris who authored the 3-volume biography of Theodore Roosevelt, and he was actually the official biographer of Ronald Reagan and had a lot of access to him. When this book finally came out, Nancy Reagan didn't like it very well, but it's really a pretty balanced account of Reagan's life. A more recent biography is this book, which was published in 2018. It's called Reagan, An American Journey by Bob Spitz. A good single-volume biography that covers his whole life. So here's an interesting book published in 2017. It's by Henry Olsen, The Working Class Republican, Ronald Reagan and the Return of Blue-Collar Conservatism. And it documents Reagan's appeal to the so-called Reagan Democrats. And that's the crux of what the book is about. It draws parallels between the coalition that Ronald Reagan was able to put together and the coalition that Donald Trump was able to put together in 2016. Craig Shirley has authored several great books about Reagan. I have a couple of them. This is a really good one. This was published in 2009. It's called Rendezvous with Destiny, Ronald Reagan and the Campaign That Changed America. And it's really a great account of the 1980 campaign for the presidency. This book was published in 2013. It's by the commentator Chris Matthews. It's called Tip and the Gipper, When Politics Worked. And Chris Matthews had worked as a staffer for Tip O'Neill, so it is the story of President Ronald Reagan and House Speaker Tip O'Neill and how, despite their many differences, they were able to work together. This is another book in Bill O'Reilly's Killing series. It was published in 2015, and it's called Killing Reagan, The Violent Assault That Changed a Presidency. And it's a straightforward account of the assassination attempt on President Reagan as he left the Washington Hilton Hotel in March of 1981. Here's another good book by Craig Shirley, published in 2015. It's called Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. And it covers Reagan's post-presidency from his final address at the 1992 Republican Convention to his disclosure that he has Alzheimer's disease, and his life after that and his death. This is a very unique book. It's by Mark Weinberg, who worked in the Reagan White House. It was published in 2018, and it's called Movie Nights with the Reagans, a Memoir. The Reagans would often go to Camp David on the weekends and watch classic movies on Friday and Saturday nights. And this memoir features specific classic movies that they watched on specific nights, and it tells you the name of the movie, who starred in it, and when the Reagans watched it, and then it gives you a feel for the film and sort of ties it into the Reagans and everything that was going on at the time. So, as I say, quite a unique book and quite an interesting read. So here's a book published in 1988. It's called Grinning with the Gipper, a celebration of the wit, wisdom, and wisecracks of Ronald Reagan. Reagan certainly was known for his wit, and so this is a good account of Reagan's humor. Reagan's memoirs were published in 1990, and it's called An American Life, the Autobiography by Ronald Reagan. And here we have some of Reagan's speeches. It's called Speaking My Mind, Selected Speeches of Ronald Reagan. Well, George Shultz was Reagan's second Secretary of State and served as Secretary of State for most of Reagan's presidency. These are his memoirs, published in 1993, Turmoil and Triumph, My Years as Secretary of State. And a figure who featured in the Iran-Contra affair, published in 1991, Under Fire, An American Story by Oliver North. Our next episode will take a look at our nation's 41st president, George Bush.